Welcome to episode 14 of Plays Well with Others. This is actually a two-parter, so if you haven't seen episode 13, go back and listen to it. This is going to be a continuation on the same topic. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Make sure that you share, comment, like, all those fun things on whatever platform you're using. We love to hear from you. I am Jess Agnew, and I'm joined today by our wonderful, fantastic co-host, Andrew Moore. As I said, today we're continuing on with our discussion from last time around remote work. Last time we really focused in on from an individual contributor perspective, how remote work has maybe impacted you, some tactical things you can do to be more effective, some things you can do to get plugged in within not only your workplace, but your community. And today we want to continue talking about that, but from a layer up, looking at it from the hiring manager perspective, as well as potentially from a company perspective, because there's a lot of conversation right now around remote work as a viable future for a lot of different companies. So, Andrew, I'd actually like to talk to you and have you talk a little bit about your perspective as a hiring manager. I know you do a lot of hiring from a remote perspective. What are you looking for? How are you thinking about this? What are you asking about?
So there's a lot to that, and I did mention in the last episode that there's going to be value here if you're not a hiring manager as well. So
Absolutely.
don't turn away. We promise. I got you. But so the interesting thing about remote work, and I'll say remote hiring pre-COVID was very different. You know, you worked with a recruiter. So here's first nugget for anybody, individual contributor, hiring manager, whatever. Work with a recruiter. Find a good one. There's a bunch of them, but find a good one. If you need one, DM me. I've got a few. I've got the hookup. I'll get you. But work with a recruiter that understands the job market and understands what kind of salary requirements, benefit requirements, what all each area will support. And that's a good first step, because I've had a few recruiters that I've worked with that have called me and said, listen, Andrew, this role you're trying to hire for either too little or not, the role's not written well enough to grab somebody's attention or whatever. This is what they do. They do it every single day. So they really know what is going to grab a candidate's attention. They know what kind of salary requirements a given area is going to support.
Yeah.
But you got to take into account that since we've all gone remote, and you've seen the postings on TikTok or YouTube, developers working from a beachside hut in Bali, it's not completely off track. You know, folks have moved to be closer to family or to be in the type of home or environment that they want to be in. So you've got to keep in mind that means that your talent pool is way wider, but you also have to deal with pesky things like time zones, and you know, you're obviously not going to hire somebody in Topeka at the same rate that you're hiring somebody in Los Angeles or San Francisco.
Yeah. Time zones can be a positive too, though. As a hiring manager, you can use that to your benefit, because you can hiring someone to fill a role from, that runs until 7 p.m. at night can sometimes be incredibly challenging. But if you just hire someone on the West Coast who is already in a time zone where that's only 5 o'clock for them, all of a sudden you're going to get more interest in the role. So there's pros and cons on both of these items.
Yeah, and it's interesting as a manager working with people that are entirely remote, and a lot of it comes from the ability to not only have the colleague or the employee be engaged, but also your engagement with them. And I saw a TikTok yesterday where it was a hiring manager that was describing I don't want to say conflict, but a challenge with a colleague of being on camera. And he was outlining a lot of the psychological effects or impacts of being on camera, when particularly for neurodivergent people was his bent, but in general, being on camera can be stressful, it can be taxing. But you don't think about that when you're in the office. You think that you've got this idea that, well, I'm going to hire a remote worker and it should feel like that person is working in an office with me. But that's not entirely accurate, and that's not going to be how you get the most engagement from that person, and it's just not practical.
Yeah. It's difficult when you think about, as a leader, how am I going to make this relationship something that has trust and has openness, but is still, they understand their responsibilities. And you start approaching that a little differently when you have a remote environment. I can't stress enough the value that I've found in having morning meetings with my team so that everyone gets together once a day and I have the opportunity to go, what are you working on? What's coming up next? What did you just finish? Are you running into any blockers? Is there anything that's preventing you from doing what you need to get done? And those daily conversations where you open the doors to just little snippets of feedback, those really can take the place of those just side-by-side conversations that you would have in the office. And sometimes they're even more productive because you're asking pointed questions to each person on your team. What'd you do yesterday? What are you doing today? And do you have any blockers?
Yeah, I think that's in part what the Agile process or Agile work management system is trying to codify, is the idea that no matter how you are working or where you're working, you should be able to get the same feedback as quickly or as rapidly as you need. Yeah. But the challenge there is when you have, especially when you have a cross-functional team. So a real Agile Scrum team is ideally one that's made up of different functions that all work together to accomplish the same goal. So you, as a hypothetical, you have developer, you have QA tester, you have ops engineer, infrastructure engineer, whatever, so that one team has every component of capability required to deliver a feature. But so when you're in these morning stand-ups, you run the risk of digging into one person's thing, and suddenly the other two people on the 3-person team are sitting there twiddling their thumbs because it's like, I don't really have a dog in this fight. But when you can keep those conversations succinct and you have the big hammer that says we're taking this offline, so I'll catch up with you in a minute. As long as you have the bandwidth to do that, that keeps everyone engaged and keeps those sessions really effective instead of just
And Andrew, I see you doing that all the time. You'll go, yep, that's important. You maybe ask 1 or 2 pointed questions and you go, okay, let's sync up after this, or do you have time right after this to have a quick chat? And you just enough information on the call to know where you need to go from there, but you don't take up the entire conversation.
Right. So the key there, and I talked about this in the last episode, I think episode 13, but the key there is keeping room in your calendar to get the stuff done that you need to get done. It's as a VP or as a strategic leader, you're often in a position where your head's up here. I'm thinking about things at this level, but then you get into a stand-up or you get into a conversation with one of your team that says, I need to figure out how to develop this particular module. Then you have to dive down here, and if you don't have the time to do that, like if you're just back to back to back to back to back meetings all day, then you're doing 2 things. One, you're letting your team get away from you and you're losing touch with reality, what's actually happening. But 2, you've got team members that are asking for your leadership or asking for your direction and you're not giving it to them. And that when you're in an office, you get that opportunity as you walk in the door, hey boss man, what are we doing? But when you're remote, you don't have that. So you have to take the opportunities when you get them, and you also have to make time to really engage.
And another thing I think that scares hiring managers about hiring for remote work is the training in process. And how are you sure that you've hired a good candidate? How are you sure that they're profitable once, they're contributing in a reasonable amount of time? I mean, I've run into this situation before where I had someone that I was so confident was going to be able to do what they needed to do. I was just kind of like, go do this thing and take care of it. And then come back in 3 months and nothing was done. And that is, okay, it wasn't actually 3 months. It was more like 3 weeks. But my point is that you walk away thinking they've got this, they know enough, their credentials are really good, they're going to be able to handle this. Well, that was when I was still kind of learning how to do this remote leadership process. What kind of tools do you use to A, make sure that they're getting up to speed, and B, make sure once you feel they're up to speed, you're able to confirm and observe their productivity?
Yeah, so that's a hard question. And we've all been guilty of this at some point. You either are going hell for leather, I'm kind of bulldozing you over, wanting updates, wanting status updates. What are you doing? How are you doing? And then micromanaging the execution. Or you run the other side of the spectrum, which is disengagement. I'm trusting you, but it's not really leadership at that point. It's disengagement hiding behind trust. So in order to really get around that, I would highly recommend the book Crucial Conversations. If you don't read the whole thing, scan like the first quarter of the book, because
it's a lot of the good stuff.
Yes, and when I feel most like I don't want to have a conversation, that book helped me realize, okay, that's probably when I need to have the conversation, because that feeling of avoidance in myself tells me that I've got some latent emotions around a situation. I'm either disappointed with how execution is happening, or I don't agree with the approach, or something, and I'm avoiding it because it's uncomfortable, it's conflict, it's whatever. So first and foremost, just not even a tool, it's just an awareness, self-awareness. If you feel like you don't want to have a conversation, then go do it. And you may not even know what to say. Just go strike up a conversation. Do your one-on-ones. Keep that line of questioning or that line of communication open. In terms of training, this is a really good one. When you're bringing new people on, you're likely going to start from nothing. Just start from square one. I don't have any resources. I don't have any documentation. Maybe you don't have an L&D team, learning and development team, to help bring people up to speed on the industry, on the tech stack, on all the things that a new person needs to know.
Yeah.
You have to make a decision to start keeping up with that. And for us here at the current company, what happened was we just drew a line in the sand and said no more, because we can't keep doing this. It's too stressful. It's bringing people, taking people way too long to get spun up, just because there's no resource for them to know even what code repository is this stuff in. So we just started keeping we started a Word document. I know it's not great, but it was something.
Exactly.
But where I've actually learned something from a previous teammate. When you're making documentation for onboarding, don't assume anything ever. Don't assume anybody knows anything. It's the subreddit Explain It Like I'm 5. You know, I thought
explain it like they're 2.
Right. When I first saw his approach to documentation, I had this thought process of, well, that seems a little excessive. There's a lot to that. But then as I started engaging with the documentation, as I saw team members engaging with the documentation, that, oh, no, that's really good, because I don't have to ask questions. I go look at the documentation and it answers everything I need to know, and it's all linked to the other documents, and I can find everything, and it's all great. So in terms of getting people up to speed, document everything. Confluence is a great tool. SharePoint, OneNote, Evernote, there's a blue million tools. Just pick one and start writing stuff down.
And I find myself referencing these documents sometimes. Like I'll have written up, quick how-tos on how to do these little tasks that we have to do within the division. And somebody will leave the company who was responsible for that task. And, maybe I cover it for an interim period of time before someone else takes it over. Or maybe we're doing a handoff, a warm handoff before they leave the company. And it's already there, like it's already documented. Mm-hmm. Or worse yet, a process that you don't have to do very often, where it's like 6 months between times when you do it, and you're the one who wrote it, you're the one responsible for it, and you've forgotten how to do it. And your documentation is so very, very helpful at that point. Mm-hmm. I always use the rule that I want to be able to look back at it in 3 years and remember what the heck I was talking about. So that's the level of detail I want to get in there.
Yeah, and when you start looking at remote work, it's so much more important that your documentation is good and that you've written it down, because when you're in person, you can kind of fake it. You've got sticky notes sitting on somebody's desk. I can walk over there and look at it, but when you're remote, you don't know, and you can't know. Mm-hmm. I saw a post earlier, and I don't know what I think about it, because I literally saw it 10, 15 minutes ago. But there was a post on LinkedIn where an individual stated that they're a startup, so small team, presumably. And they said that their communication is, they're 100% remote team. Their communication is 95% written, and they are completely meaningless. And he brought up, he said, we're way more effective than anybody else because there's written record, there's less miscommunication, there's less forgotten things, conversations become documented assets much quicker. Mm-hmm. And I thought about that. My gut reaction said, I could see maybe 50% written in maybe half the meetings that we have, because I think there's some intrinsic value in talking to people. But then the more I think about it, I don't know that there is. If I've never met the rest of my team, if I'm there filling features, do I need that intrinsic relational context? And I don't know.
Personally, I would say yes, just because I've also seen written communication not be as effective as verbal communication in terms of understanding and in terms of being able to explain effectively what you're trying to do. I love the idea of conversations becoming written assets and being able to have so much of what you are conversing back and forth with in writing that, you don't have as much hearsay conversations. Well, I thought we talked about this on a call. I thought we conversed about this already. And that might work if you're very specifically doing similar roles and you have very specific outlooks on where you're coming from. I do think that written communication can get tricky when you have someone who is maybe very business facing versus someone who's very tech facing and struggling with the differences in those language. That vernacular, you know what I mean, is going to be very different. So I think there's an incredibly huge amount of value in conversation. I think it can help with, just being more joyful at work as well. Some of my favorite times are when I get to speak with some of my wonderful colleagues who just bring joy to my life simply talking with them. However, I do think that there is a lot to be earned by that asynchronous communication and focus on efficiency during periods of the day as well. So I think that there's balance there.
That's where my gut leans. Mm-hmm. I think it's an interesting thought experiment that I'm going to explore some more, because part of me says, what if I didn't have all of this personal engagement with my job? Would that give me better work-life balance? Would that give me the ability to disconnect easier? And how much of the relational aspect is built simply because we worked in an office with people for hundreds of years?
So hear me out. There is this thing within me where I get excited about certain things at work. Like I love certain things about my job. There's this consultant that we use, and when him and I get on a call together, his name's Jody, and he's fantastic. But when we get on a call together, I just get hyped up. I start like I share some of the ideas I have. He bounces some things back at me. He gives me some perspective on things that he's experienced in his life. I bounce another idea. Well, what if I took what you just said there and what if I did this? And in the moment, I'm evolving my ideas and my concepts and how I'm going to approach these big problems that feel almost unsolvable. And that conversation just brings so much excitement and clarity and conviction to what I'm doing that I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I have that with a lot of people that I work with, where when we get in a room together and we whiteboard things out or we talk through a problem, we bounce our ideas off each other, and there's this flow that happens in this conversation where you come to a new conclusion that you never would have outside of it. That doesn't mean that I couldn't be effective, fully separate, fully written, fully asynchronous. But I do think it would suck a little bit of the excitement, a little bit of the joy, a little bit of that human connection. I think it would suck some of that out of the experience, and I wouldn't give it up for anything.
What you are watching and listening to is why DEI initiatives are so important. So what we're seeing is that there are people that really enjoy the human aspect of collaboration. And then there are people that really enjoy the idea, working out the thought, more so than the engagement and the human connection. So as a hiring manager, especially one that's managing a remote team, you got to know what your team makeup is. How many, if your entire team loves the human connection, then great, act accordingly.
Awesome.
Video calls, let's rock and roll. If your team is made up of a mix of people that just want to put their headphones on and do the work, keep them engaged, obviously, but what their enjoyment is out of their job is not likely going to be the team call with everybody on the video. What they're going to enjoy is more opportunities to chat, more opportunities to research new things, new ideas. So when you are a hiring manager that's looking to build a team, you need to ensure that you've got the appropriate balance of remote and in-person based on your company's needs. So that's, rule number one, just make sure you're hiring the right people. Number two, you got to make sure that as you hire people, you understand what engagement and inclusion looks like for them, because they may not tell you that this is what I want. So you need to tease that out. And then number three, you've got to make sure that you're being honest with yourself. Am I getting, as a person accountable for results, am I getting what I need out of the structure that I've defined? And am I properly engaging and including the team based on what they need?
Yeah. And, all of this kind of filters into something that you just said there, making sure you're hiring what's needed for your company. There is a lot of conversation going on right now in so many industries around, well, now that we're out of the worst with COVID, maybe we need to go back to the office. Everyone needs to be full-time back in the office. And I would urge companies to not just act on that impulsively as, well, that's what we did before, so that's what we should do now. There's no reason for us to stay remote. I think the question isn't, is there a reason to stay remote? I think the question is there a reason to go back to the office? And sometimes that answer is going to be yes. Sometimes you're going to have help desk individuals who need to be there, people who are meeting with clients that need to have office space in order to do that. There's a myriad of reasons why being in office is the right decision for a certain particular role. And there's also going to be some tough conversations you're going to need to have with yourselves and with your leadership at your company of, hey, we're making people come back to the office, and there's not really a valid reason why this needs to happen. There's no driver for that. And you're going to lose out on awesome candidates. You're going to lose out on people who maybe have enjoyed working remote for the past 2 years and don't want to go back into the office. Once things turn around a little bit in the market, you're going to see a lot of attrition because of that. If you're forcing people to go back in who've proven that they're as effective or more effective remote. So that's just something to kind of think about as you're moving forward as well.
I think the important aspect of that is that we as an industry, or we as hiring managers, as leaders, have to ensure that we're thinking about remote work in the right way. Some people may not see being fully remote as a benefit. Some people may prefer to be in an office setting. And I think we have to stop talking about remote work as a benefit only, but as an option. So if I'm sitting here trying to develop a strategy for my business going forward, I can't only think about how we're going to present remote work. Like, hey, you come work for us. You're fully remote. You don't even have to worry about coming into an office. But there's that segment of the population, myself included, that's going to say, I'd really kind of like to have an office that I have an option to go to. I'd like that flexibility. You know, if my house is loud, I've got, you know, people downstairs making a racket or whatever. You know, we've all heard it. You've got I had a leader one time that was having a new roof put on their house, and he was just driving him crazy because they're just banging nails into the roof all day long. Wouldn't it be great if he had the opportunity to just say, you know what, I'm going to go to the office, just get somewhere where I can focus. But it's important that we be pragmatic. We've got to know what our team needs, what our business requires. Because like you said, Jess, there's absolutely a case where you're going to have, you know, realtors, lenders, people that meet with clients, salespeople. You really kind of need a space. And it should be a cool space
constantly, but you should have a place that you can go. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot to think about in terms of how you manage that team that might be a hybrid role as well, right? Because I don't know if you guys have ever tried this, but if you've ever tried to hold a meeting where like a third of it is in person and 2/3 of it is online, that can be really difficult. Anytime there's a hybrid of online and in person, somebody's going to feel left out of it. Like somebody's going to feel not engaged. There's going to be a lot of chatter. It's going to be difficult to manage. So there is something to be said for, okay, we're hybrid. The entire group is in on Tuesday, Thursday, and we're all at home on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, because then we'll have consistency and we're either all in person or we're all online. That's not always feasible, but it's definitely something to keep in the back of your minds, because once you start going half remote, half at home, or half in the office, you might end up with situations where you go to the office, sit at your desk, and you might as well be at home because you can't go to a physical room anymore because no one else is there, or you'll feel like the odd man out sitting in a room by yourself, like on this giant monitor.
Yep. There was a book that was written, and I think it was either published or promoted by Slack, but the idea was, and I think the title was just Remote, but the concept was, if anybody is remote, you have to work like everybody is. So you can't have these scenarios where you get half the team in a conference room and the other half are sitting on the phone, because you've seen it. Either the people that are remote, the volume's turned way up, and the people that are remote immediately get control whenever they speak, or you know, they can't see, they can't hear, they can't see the whiteboard, whatever. And there's solutions for some of this, but you've got to drive consistency. And kind of my parting thought on that is, if you're going to have a hybrid team, it removes a lot of the flexibility of remote work if you say everybody's going to be here on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
It does.
But what you can do is ensure that your managers are engaged with the idea of bringing people into the office when it's necessary and incentivizing that return. So at this point, there's no value in me going to sit at my desk when everybody else is just sitting at their desk and nobody's talking. So think about doing team lunches or team building activities or ensuring that there is actually a conference room that you're all going to sit in and you're going to work on a problem. You're going to whiteboard. There's got to be a reason you came in other than just being at the office. And that is, we are coming up on time. We told you last week, this is going to be a dense episode. And as you've seen, we've touched on a few high level topics, and there's still more because I've still got a list over here. So I'm not committing us to a third part of the 2-part series, but this is such a pervasive topic around how to lead in 2023 and beyond that it almost always, it's like DEI, it almost always comes back to this topic. How do you engage people that are remote? How do you ensure that everyone's included when there are some people that are remote and some people aren't? How do you make people feel like they are just as important even though they don't live in your headquarters city? All of these topics come up.
How do you manage effectively remotely?
Right.
How do you hire effectively remotely? How do you build a relationship effectively remotely? There's a lot to dissect.
Yes. And you will certainly hear more about these topics going forward. As a reminder, this has been episode 14. Go ahead, if you've made it this far, really appreciate it. I've appreciated all of your engagement. We recently passed the milestone of 250 downloads, so that's been cool, and it's nice to see the engagement and the downloads coming. Keep it up, share, rate, subscribe. Go ahead, check us out on YouTube as well. We're sending some shorts over there, some snippets out of the podcast, some dedicated content. You can see the videos from all of the episodes there. If you're just now joining us, there's 13 more episodes that you can go listen or watch. So go get ready. This episode will come out on Fridays, and you'll have a few days to catch up before the next episode on Wednesday. So get in there. Thanks for the engagement, and thanks for listening.